Hi everyone, Miss Fisher here. This is the lesson for 11 Addresses to the Lord by John Berryman. The first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is to go ahead and scroll through and read the poem in its entirety, and then replay the video again so that we can begin the note-taking process. Okay, so now that you've read through the poem once on your own, we're going to come through and first we're going to find the basic meaning for each of these stanzas. We're going to talk a little bit about that, as well as then we're going to go back in for the annotations, and then we will do some questioning and basic thematic understandings of the poem. So let's go through stanza by stanza. Sole watchman of the flying stars, guard me against my flicker of impulse lust. Teach me to see them as sisters and daughters. Sustain my grand endeavors, husbandship and crafting. So if we look specifically at the first, hang on, I gotta change the color of our highlighting tool here. If we look at this first stanza, I see a few things stick out to me. First, he's saying, guard me against my flicker of impulse lust. And we know that in his life, in John Berryman's life, he had a difficulty remaining faithful to his wives. It was clearly impulsive for him to be so lustful for other women. So he's asking God to help him to remain faithful to his wife. He says to teach me to see them as sisters and daughters, so kind of seeing them as non-sexual beings, helping him to remain faithful to his wife. Sustained my grand endeavors, husbandship and crafting, and that is referring to he wants to be a good husband and he also wants to be a good writer, and that's that crafting piece. That's his craft. So if we talk about the basic understandings, he is asking his Lord, and that is that sole watchman of the flying stars, to help him remain faithful to his wife and family. He wants to be a good husband and writer. His grand endeavors, husbandship and crafting. So if we go on to the next stanza, forsake me not when my wild hours come, grant me sleep nightly, grace soften my dreams, achieve in me patience till the thing be done, a careful view of my achievement come. So when we're talking about this first line, I pick out here, wild hours come, and we know about John Berryman's life that he did have difficulty. In 1939, he actually was hospitalized for nervous exhaustion, and again from 1959 until the end of his life, he was hospitalized nearly once a year. So we do know that he might have suffered from some kind of anxiety disorder, and that's probably what these wild hours refer to. He says, grant me sleep nightly, grace soften my dreams. Clearly he struggled from some kind of nightmare, so he wasn't sleeping very well. Achieve in me patience till the thing be done, a careful view of my achievement come. And these achievements here that he's talking about, that he's going to need patience from the Lord with, is his grand endeavors to be a good husband and a good writer. So he's asking for patience. He knows that he's not perfect, and that he might make mistakes, but that he's going to need the Lord to be patient with him, and that he's going to work very hard for these grand endeavors or these achievements that he wants so very much. So he is asking his Lord for help through anxiety attacks and sleepless nights, asking for patience while he works towards achieving his goals, knowing that that is being a good husband and writer. stanza 1, right? So if we go on to our next one, make me from time to time the gift of the shoulder. When all hurt nerves whine, shut away the whiskey. Empty my heart toward thee. Let me pace without fear the common path of death. So, make from me time to time the gift of the shoulder. What does this mean? It means that he wants to be the person that other people can lean on. Instead of always being the one who needs help, he wants to be the one that people can come to and lean on his shoulder. When all hurt nerves whine, shut away the whiskey. He's asking his Lord to help him keep away from alcohol, even when he desperately feels like he needs it. Empty my heart toward thee. Let me pace without fear the common path of death. And what we know about John Berryman's life is that he did struggle with death. When he was 12, his father committed suicide right outside of his window. When he was 17, he attempted suicide himself. So we know that this idea of death is not one that he takes very easily. So he's asking for help with that. So he wants to be a person that others can lean on, asking for help to stay away from alcohol, and asking him for help on not fearing death. Okay? So for the next stanza, actually the final stanza, cross am I sometimes with my little daughter, fill her eyes with tears. Forgive me, Lord. Unite my various soul, sole watchman of the wide and single stars. So first, we can see that he's asking for forgiveness for sometimes not being the best father. And then he's also asking him to unite his various soul. And that is a key line, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the annotations part. But it is important that we understand that what does he mean by various soul? Well, you look back at different parts of this poem. Impulse, lust, being infidelis towards his wife, not necessarily always being the best husband. Looks like he has some kind of nervous or anxiety disorder. He, is an alcoholic, or at least uses alcohol to try to keep away some of his problems. And we also do know that he does fear death. These kinds of things, this variety in his soul does not match very well with the family man, the typical family man. So he's asking his Lord to help him unite his soul, meaning kind of bringing all aspects of him into one so that he could be a good husband, a good father, and a good writer all in one. And again, this sole watchman of the wide and single stars, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the annotations. But what is this last stanza saying? Well, he is asking for forgiveness for not always being the best father. He is asking for help to become a steady, reliable person. Right? That's uniting his very soul. He wants to be steady. He wants to be reliable. He wants to be a good husband. He wants to be a good writer. So now that we have read through and have a basic understanding of what the poem is about, let's go ahead and do some annotations. And I'm going to change the highlighting color because we're going to do a few other, let me see, pink maybe? That'd be good. Okay. So we have in this first stanza, sole watchman of the flying stars. What is this sole watchman? Right? That's what we are asking ourselves. Sole watchman, that is his Lord, right? Of the flying stars, guard me. This word guard, I don't know if it's going to let me highlight it again. It probably won't, but that's okay. Guard, this is guard me. It's showing his vulnerability, right? Because he's asking for protection. He's admitting vulnerability. Sorry, asking for protection. He's telling his Lord, hey, look, I'm weak. I need your help. Teach me to see them as sisters and daughters. Sustain my grand endeavors, husbandship and crafting. This guard me, teach me, sustain me. This is beginning this new pattern of different commands or imperatives. And I'm actually going to choose a different highlighting color so I can go through the whole text and show you exactly what I mean by that. So I will choose blue. We have teach me, sustain my grand endeavors. These are all commands he's giving the Lord. Forsake me, grant me, achieve, till the thing, a careful view of my achievement come, make me, when all my hurt nerves whine, shut away. Like I said, I don't think it's gonna let me highlight that again. Maybe it will. Crud. Oh well, okay, so shut away the whiskey is another one. Empty my heart toward thee. Let me pace without fear. Cross my sometimes with my little daughter. Forgive me. This is another one. If I could highlight it, I would. Unite is another one. If I could highlight it, I would. Sole watchman of the wide and single stars. So, maybe I can underline it. Can I do that? Nah, it doesn't let me do that. Okay, so go back to pink. Now that we know, I'm gonna actually go ahead and say this. Commands pattern developing here, okay? We talked a little bit about this. Who is them? Who does them refer to? And we know that that refers to women, right? Because we're talking about this impulse lust, asking them to see them as sisters and daughters. And he's saying, my grand endeavors here are husbandship and crafting. And we know then that he holds two things in very high esteem. He holds his work in high esteem. Husband and poet. Okay. Forsake me not. This one here, you can tell, it's beginning to sound, reading like a prayer. You can tell that he's kind of praying to his Lord, and it's in structure and audience, right? Who is he talking to? He is talking to the sole watchman of the flying stars. He is talking to his Lord. So you can tell that it's beginning to read and sound like a prayer in both structure and audience. So then you're probably thinking to yourself, why insert this part, a careful view of my achievement come? Why insert this? What is his reasoning? He clearly has an achievement to worry about. Let's see if I can spell it right. And that is that achieving his goals there, husband and writer from stanza 1. All right, the third one, the gift of the shoulder. He makes this pretty ambiguous here, and he does this on purpose. You might have thought to yourself, ambiguous. Who needs the shoulder? Does he need the shoulder, or is it that he wants to be the shoulder? We decided over here that he definitely seems like he wants to be someone that others can lean on. But you can make the argument that it is rather ambiguous. And what ambiguous means is that it's indeterminate. You can't decide, it's kind of unclear. That's what ambiguous means. So make me from time to time the gift of the shoulder. And there is some ambiguity in this. Is it that he needs one, or is he the shoulder himself? And that's going to come into play a little bit later down in the poem. So if we look at this last stanza, we also see an example of ambiguity, and that is in this line. Fill her eyes with tears. And you might be asking yourself, who is doing the filling? The Lord or him? Cross am I sometimes with my little daughter, fill her eyes with tears. Forgive me, Lord. If you look at the parallelism here, forgive me, Lord, he's talking to the Lord. Maybe he's talking to the Lord, he's saying, fill her eyes with tears. So here's some more ambiguity. Is the Lord filling her eyes with tears, or is her father filling her eyes with tears? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. You might be thinking, why would her eyes be filled with tears from the Lord? Well, maybe she's been praying to the Lord to help her father, and her father still hasn't gotten better, and so she's crying that the Lord has not fulfilled her prayers. Or she's crying because her father has not been there for her, or has been mean to her, being cross with her. So there is some ambiguity there as well. We talked a little bit about this various soul, right? And it will not let me highlight it again, but talking about this various soul. Various soul explains the variety in the poem. Right? We talk about all kinds of things. What are some of the various things we talk about? Well, we talk about this lust. We talk about being a good husband. We talk about being a good poet. We talk about nervous exhaustion here with Wild Hours. We talk about patience. We talk about whiskey. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are kind of going on here, this variety in the poem. And this various soul matches that variety in the poem. And then we'll even further of the variety here is this soul watchman of the wide and single stars. Why is that different from the soul watchman of the flying stars? Why not just repeat soul watchman of the flying stars? Why is it the wide and single stars? So you might be asking yourself why the change from flying to wide and single. Okay, so great job annotating this poem. You can tell that it's a complicated poem, but definitely one that we can work through. So when we get to the back side of this page, you can see what are some of our takeaway thoughts. What are some of our takeaway thoughts? And I have a few that I'd like to mention. We have an emphasis, right, on commands, which we can also call imperative structures, okay? Imperatives just means commands. That seems to imply a personal weakness. They all tell someone else to do something instead of announcing an action on the part of the narrator. And that's pretty significant when you think about he's praying, but instead of just saying, Lord, I promise I'm going to stay away from other women. I'm going to be a good father. I'm going to be a good poet. Lord, I'm not going to have nervous breakdowns. I'm going to sleep well. I'm going to be patient with myself even if I make mistakes. Lord, I promise that I'm going to shut away the whiskey. I'm going to not fear death. Instead of doing that, instead of promising these things, instead he's asking for help. And again, this shows his vulnerability, asking for protection. He is showing this personal weakness by asking someone else to do something instead of him doing it himself. Another takeaway, this various word that we just were speaking about in the last stanza can tie the entire poem together, since the reader sees multiple views of him and seemingly explains the source of the narrator's pain. So, when we're thinking about this, we were talking about all of these things. We were talking about lust, alcohol, nervous or anxiety, etc. These are all sources of his pain, and they are various, these multiple views of him. Another takeaway from the poem is the narrator seems to be at the mercy of different forces. Thus, various. See list above, right? This lust, alcohol, nervousness, anxiety. Might even add being cross with his daughter. So maybe anger, fear, right? Fearing death. Another takeaway from this poem, every stanza ends on a positive note, more or less. And you're probably, is that true, Miss Fisher? Well, I don't know. Let's go back up and take a look. My grand endeavors, husbandship and crafting. That's definitely a positive image. A careful view of my achievement come. Absolutely, that's a positive image. Reaching his achievements and being careful about it. Let me pace without fear the common path of death. Although you might argue, well, this image of death is pretty sad and scary. Pacing without fear, living life without fear of death is a pretty positive image. Could you imagine going your entire life without ever fearing death? And then again, this sole watchman of the wide and single stars. And that's a pretty positive image, thinking about someone who has the power over all of the stars, being able to watch over you. So every stanza ends on a positive note, more or less. And one last takeaway, his ambiguous word choice, which we talked about in the third and final stanza, seems to highlight his own weakness. If he is unclear, right, if he uses unclear word choice, that could symbolize his own unclear life and his own unclear weaknesses in his own life. Okay? So we have some really great takeaway thoughts here. So this leads us to the next box where it says connections to the author's life. So what I'm going to have you do is I am going to ask you to pause the video now and look for two obvious connections that the poem has to the author's life and write them down in the correct box. Then you're going to replay the video for further directions. So again, you are doing that on the second box on the second page of your worksheet. Okay, so now that you have completed at least two, we're actually going to, you're going to bring this with you to class tomorrow, and you're going to be sharing with a partner. So go ahead and make sure that that is complete, because I will be checking that tomorrow. And then the last thing that I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and fill in this exit slip question. What do you feel is the best use of phrasing in the poem? Then you're going to replay the video for further directions. Okay, so now that you have completed the exit slip talking about what is the best use of phrasing in the poem. That just means the best word choice, basically. So if you were confused on that, I'll clarify that now. What is the best word choice? What do you think really is the strongest line here from the poem that tells you about the theme or the big ideas, some of these big takeaway thoughts from the poem? So then you're going to do that. You're going to come back to class tomorrow and share that with us as well. Thanks so much for watching the video. Hopefully this was helpful. And again, tomorrow we will go over this together. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.